The signal came in broken. That was the first thing. Not the content of it, not the coordinates buried inside the static, not even the name of the ship, just the brokenness of it. The way it limped across 3 relay stations and arrived at Galactic Council Space half dead, like something that had crawled a very long way to collapse on a doorstep. Comms Officer Dila of the Solani fleet was the first to receive it. She sat with her 4 upper fingers pressed flat against her translation console and listened to the broken thing repeat itself for 40 seconds before she called her superior. Her superior called his. By the time the signal reached the Galactic Council chamber on Veth Station, it had been cleaned up, reconstructed, and decoded. It had also been determined to be 3 days old. 3 days. The chamber held 11 seated representatives, one from each recognized species of the Galactic Coalition. The room was wide and pale and shaped like the inside of a shell, curved walls angling inward toward a central dais where the decoded signal now played through a speaker in a loop. Kalos Dawn to any receiving station. We have sustained critical damage. FTL drive offline. Life support at 41%. We are drifting in the null corridor at coordinates. Static. 312 crew aboard. We have wounded. We are not. More static. Please respond. Kalos Dawn to any. The loop ended. The chamber was quiet. Admiral Keth of the Solani spoke first. He was old by Solani standards, which meant he was extremely old by any standard, and his voice carried the particular flatness of someone who had spent a long time being right about terrible things. The null corridor, he said. It was not a question. He was simply stating the problem out loud so that the room understood the problem. The Thorak representative, a heavy-set diplomat named Voskara, pulled up a star map. The null corridor was marked in gray. Gray in the standard coalition cartographic language meant, do not enter without extraordinary cause. It was a long, narrow region of space where the physics of faster-than-light travel simply stopped cooperating. Ships that tried to jump in the corridor came out sideways, or came out dead, or did not come out at all. The Kareth Empire held the corridor. Not officially, they had never officially claimed anything, but their patrol fleets moved through it freely, and any coalition vessel that lingered too long tended to disappear. Kalos Dawn was a coalition research vessel. 312 crew. It had been conducting approved surveys at the corridor's edge when something had gone wrong. Keth did not need the rest of the signal to build the picture. He had seen this shape before. How long has it been drifting? Asked the Vreth representative, a small creature named C who communicated through a translation collar. At minimum 3 days, said the Solani communications aide who had brought the signal to the chamber. Possibly longer if the signal was delayed at the relay, and the Kareth patrol patterns in that sector. The aide pulled up a second display. The patrol lines moved across the corridor like slow, deliberate fingers. No one said anything. They did not need to. The room understood the shape of the problem completely. A ship adrift in the null corridor, FTL offline, life support failing, with Kareth patrol fleets moving nearby and 3 days already gone. The mathematics of the situation were not complicated. They were just very clean and very final. Keth set his palms flat on the table. The corridor is inaccessible to FTL travel. Any rescue vessel approaching on sublight would take. He glanced at the aide. 4 to 6 days from the nearest coalition position, at best. 4 to 6 days for a ship that is already at 41% life support. With wounded aboard, Keth paused, and would be doing so in range of Kareth patrol fleets. C's collar translated a clicking sound. What is the current status of Kareth coalition diplomatic relations? Several people in the room found something else to look at. Strained, said Keth, which was the diplomatic word for. If a coalition vessel enters that space with weapons and starts a fight, the resulting war will cost more lives than the 312 currently dying on. Kalos Dawn. The room absorbed this. The Vreth senior delegate, a species known for their extraordinary patience, spent 40 seconds in complete silence before speaking. We should formally acknowledge the signal, he said. Record that it was received. Document that rescue was assessed and deemed unfeasible. Yes, unfeasible. And extend formal condolences to the families. More silence. It was the Thorak delegate who finally said what was in the room. 312 people. Yes, on a ship that is still transmitting. The signal is on a loop. It may be automated by now, or it may not be. No one answered him. At the back of the chamber, in the observer's row, a long curved bench reserved for junior delegates and non-voting species representatives. A human sat. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss of the Earth Coalition Fleet. She was 38 years old, dark-haired, and had the particular quality of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the deliberate suppression of its opposite. She had been in this chamber for 2 hours. She had sat through a trade dispute regarding Solani mineral rights, a procedural argument about the scheduling of the next full council session, and now this. She had said nothing. Now she raised her hand. Keth looked at her the way he looked at most things that were smaller than he expected and occupying space in his field of vision. The human observer. Lieutenant Commander Voss. She did not stand. What's the fastest sublight route into the corridor? The room shifted. Keth's expression did not change in the way a human face changes, but something moved behind it. There is no rescue mission being planned, he said. I know. I'm asking about the route. For what purpose? Voss looked at the star map that was still displayed on the central dais. The null corridor in gray. The last known position of Kalos Dawn. Marked with a small, still blip. Information, she said. Keth looked at her for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he looked at his aide. Give her the charts. The aide looked uncertain. Keth repeated himself. The aide transferred the corridor navigation data to Voss's console. She looked at it for 11 seconds. Then she stood, picked up her data tablet, and walked toward the chamber exit. Lieutenant Commander. Keth's voice followed her. The human fleet. You have 3 vessels in this sector. All of them are. He paused, selecting words. Aged. Lightly armed. The Kalos Dawn. Crew includes Solani, Thorak, Vreth, and 4 other species. It does not include humans. Voss stopped at the door. There is no rescue mission. Keth said again. You said that. She did not turn around. I heard you the first time. She left. The chamber was quiet again. C's translation collar clicked. What will they do? No one answered, because no one knew. The human species had been part of the coalition for 40 years. They were the youngest member, the smallest fleet, the shortest history. In 4 decades, they had distinguished themselves in minor ways. A few good engineers, a medical technique that turned out to be useful, a tendency to show up at humanitarian disasters with more supplies than expected. They were not known as a military power. They were not known as explorers. They were not known for very much at all, in the way that young things are not known yet. They won't go, said the Vreth delegate. They have 3 ships, against Kareth patrol fleets. They'll go, said the Theric representative, Voskara, and his voice was strange, not certain, just quiet, like a man who has seen something once before and recognizes the shape of it coming again. How can you know that? He didn't answer. In the docking bay of Veth Station, 14 minutes after Sarah Voss walked out of the council chamber, 3 human ships received new orders. The orders were short. In the human fleet, orders that came from Voss tended to be short. Kalos Dawn, Null Corridor. Attached are navigation charts. We leave in 40 minutes. Do not wait for authorization. The team. Relentless. Was a frigate, 22 years old, with a hull that had been patched in 4 places and engines that made a sound during acceleration, that the engineering team had collectively decided not to investigate too closely. Her crew of 68 had been docked at Veth Station for 3 days, resupplying. The Meridian was her sister ship, nearly identical, slightly worse hull, slightly better engines. Cold Patience was different, a smaller vessel, built for long-range operations, carrying a crew of 30 and the kind of sensor suite that cost more than the ship itself. She had been doing survey work near the station. None of these ships were warships, not really. They were deep-range vessels, the kind you sent somewhere far away when you needed something done quietly. 60 minutes after Voss left the council chamber, all 3 ships undocked. The council was still in session. They had moved on to the formal resolution, the language of the condolences, the official recording of Kalos Dawn as lost. When the docking bay master's report came through, Keth read it. He set it down. He looked at the star chart on the wall, at the gray of the null corridor, and at the Solani communications data, showing the 3 human ships already moving at full sublight speed on a heading that matched, exactly, the route to the last known position of Kalos Dawn. The Vreth delegate leaned over. What is it? Keth looked at the report for another moment. The humans are already gone, he said. No one spoke. The Kalos Dawn. Signal continued to loop through the chamber's speakers, filling the silence with its broken, crawling distress call. 312 crew aboard. We have wounded. We are not. C's collar clicked once. Gunware? She asked, though she already knew. Where we said it was impossible to go, said Keth. He turned the signal off. The chamber was very quiet. Somewhere in the blackness between known space and the null corridor's gray mouth, 3 old ships were moving toward a place that the most powerful species in the galaxy had just formally declared a grave. On the Relentless. Voss sat at the navigation console and stared at the charts. The corridor was 6 hours out at their current speed. She had 6 hours to plan something that the Coalition's greatest strategic minds had taken 20 minutes to rule impossible. She had a cook named Bosco who had once mentioned he'd watched lots of field surgery videos during a long deployment. She had an engineer named Tiv who was 22 years old and had once fixed a drive core with a wire, a clamp, and a comment that there was no reason that shouldn't work. She had 68 people on this ship alone, who had heard the mission brief, and not one of them had asked to be let off at the station. Not one. She looked at the gray mouth of the corridor on her screen. 312 people. 3 days gone. Voss made a note in her mission log. She didn't write impossible, or, and unlikely, or low probability of survival. She wrote the only word that mattered, the only one she had ever needed. En route. She closed the log and started on the tactical plan. Relentless. Moved. The meridian. Moved. And cold patience. Running quiet and dark at the edge of detection range, moved last and fastest, sliding into the black with her sensors on and her name, for once, something that felt exactly right. Behind them, Veth Station grew small and then disappeared. Ahead of them, the null corridor waited. And on. Kalos dawn. In the dark and the failing air, someone was still pressing a transmission button, still sending the signal. Still after 3 days, refusing to stop. They didn't know anyone was coming. But they had not stopped sending. That mattered. Voss thought it mattered very much. The null corridor had a smell. That was the first thing that surprised Ensign Yara Lint, 19 years old, who had never been in anything like it before. She was seated at the secondary sensor console on the Relentless. And when the ship crossed the corridor threshold, she looked up from her readouts, expecting nothing in particular, and instead her nose told her something was different. It was not a real smell. She knew that. The ship's air hadn't changed. But something in her brain translated the soft wrongness of this space into a sensation that lived in the back of the throat, low and gray, like old rain. The FTL drive had gone offline at the threshold exactly as the chart said it would. No spark, no alarm, no dramatic failure. Just a quiet absence where the jump capability used to be. Relentless. And the Meridian were running on sublight now, engines working at full capacity to maintain speed that was, by the standards of deep space travel, very slow. The cold patience had gone dark 2 hours before the threshold and had not checked in since. That was the plan. Voss stood at the center of the bridge. She had been standing for most of the last 6 hours. Not pacing, standing. Still in the way that a wall is still. The navigation charts from the council were spread across 2 screens, and she kept looking at them in the way that someone reads a document they are trying to memorize, not understand. Corridor is quiet, said Petty Officer Don from the long-range sensor board. No contacts. For now, said Voss. For now, agreed Don, who had been in deep space for 11 years and understood the phrase. For now. In the precise technical sense it was intended. In the small observation bay 2 corridors aft, a Solani named Leth Koss sat with her knees folded under her, and her 4 fingers wrapped around a cold cup of something the humans called tea. She was not crew. She was an observer, a junior diplomatic aide who had been aboard Relentless when it departed Veth Station, visiting as part of a cultural exchange program that now felt, in retrospect, extremely poorly timed. She had not asked to be let off at the station either. She was not entirely sure why. She watched the corridor through the bay window and tried to understand what she was seeing. Space looked the same here mostly. Stars. Dark. The same dark that lived everywhere between everything. But the stars were slightly wrong. Their positions shifted just enough to make her navigational instincts produce a low-frequency anxiety she couldn't locate or dismiss. The humans moved around her with the brisk practicality of people who had decided where they were going and were not in the business of discussing it further. She tried to catalog them the way a good diplomatic observer should. The cook, Bosco they called him, was not cooking. He had converted the mess hall into something resembling a medical bay, pulling supplies from storage lockers and watching, on a small screen propped against a condiment dispenser, a series of instructional videos about field triage. His lips moved slightly as he watched. He paused occasionally to practice a hand position on a rolled-up towel. He had explained to her, once 2 days ago, that he had no medical training. He had explained this the way someone says, "I don't really know how to swim," right before they jump into a river to pull out a drowning child. The sentence existed. It had no practical relevance. Leth Koss had spent 40 years studying human behavior as a discipline. She had read 17 separate academic texts on human psychology, sociology, and what the Solani called mammalian irrationality tendencies. None of them had quite prepared her for Bosco standing in a mess hall, practicing tourniquet technique on a dish towel. The first Kareth ship showed up on sensor at hour 3, then the second, then the third. 3 contacts, Don said. His voice was the same as it had been when the corridor was quiet. Kareth patrol configuration. Moving to intercept. Voss looked at the screen for 2 seconds. Formation, standard patrol triangle. They're moving at, he paused. That's fast. They were waiting, said Voss. It was not an accusation, just a statement about the shape of things. They know we're coming, or they know someone's coming, said Navigator Hale, who was 26 and excellent at fine distinctions. Same result. Voss moved to the tactical display. Get me. Meridian. The comm opened. Captain Rowe of the Meridian appeared on screen, compact, dark-skinned, with the look of someone who had already run the numbers and was interested in what Voss's numbers said. 3 Kareth, said Rowe. Said Voss. A pause. I have an idea, said Rowe. I have the same idea. It's a bad idea. All the good ideas lead back the other way. Rowe smiled. It was the kind of smile that appears on faces when people have made a decision and are now just waiting for the rest of reality to catch up. The comm closed. In the observation bay, Lethkos felt the relentless change its engine tone. She pressed her hand against the wall. The vibration told a story, acceleration, not evasion, toward the Meridian. Split right, the relentless. Split left. 2 human frigates, outdated, patched, moving at top sublight speed directly toward 3 Kareth warships. The Kareth held formation for 12 seconds. This was, Lethkos realized later, the moment when the Kareth made their first mistake. They expected the humans to behave in a way that a tactically rational species would behave when facing 3 warships with 2 smaller vessels. They expected deceleration, defensive formation, perhaps an attempt at communication. They got none of those things. What they got was relentless. Accelerating into a maneuver that the Kareth tactical database apparently did not have a proper category for. A lateral roll combined with a burn approach that brought her into weapons range, while simultaneously making her a much harder target than anything moving that fast should have been able to be. Lethkos watched through the observation window as the lead Kareth ship opened fire. The relentless moved. Not gracefully, not with the precision that Solani warships moved, the smooth, calculated arcs of a species that had been flying for 3,000 years. The relentless moved like something angry at geometry. A hard juke left, then down, then a sudden 0G roll that physically relocated half the unsecured items on the ship 2 feet in the direction of the nearest wall. Lethkos hit the wall. Her T hit the floor. Somewhere forward, someone swore loudly in English. The shot missed. Relentless opened up with her own weapons at point-blank range. The Kareth lead ship took hits across its forward hull. Not catastrophic. Relentless was not a heavy weapons platform, but real damage, the kind that made a ship's crew look at each other and ask questions. Meanwhile, the Meridian had done something quiet and clever on the other side of the formation. She had not engaged the flanking Kareth ships directly. She had burned through the gap between them at full speed and come out behind the formation, which meant the Kareth now had a human ship in front of them and a human ship behind them, and the math of that was uncomfortable regardless of size difference. The 3rd Kareth ship opened fire on the Meridian. Dot caught her aft section. Meridian spun. For 3 seconds she looked dead, dark and turning, and then her engines came back up and she was still moving, on the relentless. Voss watched the Kareth lead ship for the decision. It came after 14 seconds. The lead Kareth slowed, began a turn. Not an attack vector. A withdrawal, not a retreat. A withdrawal, there was a difference. The Kareth were not beaten. They were surprised. They were also, Voss suspected, running a report back to whatever fleet was deeper in the corridor. Let them go, she said. No one had suggested stopping them. She said it anyway, to fill the silence where a victory would have been. In a story where things were going well. Things were not going particularly well. The Meridian reported in. Aft hull damage. 1 crew member injured. Engines functional. Weapons at 60%. Captain Rowe's voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when you are counting up what you lost and deciding that what's left is enough. We're good, said Rowe. You're not good, said Voss. We're good enough, said Rowe. The relentless held her course. The Meridian Road fell back into formation, and somewhere behind them both, cold patience recorded everything, the patrol's positions, the withdrawal heading, the timestamp, and sent it on a narrow beam signal to nowhere in particular. Except nowhere in particular was the direction of known coalition space. In the observation bay, Lethkos sat on the floor where she had landed, surrounded by the spilled tea, and looked at the stars. She was composing in her head the report she would eventually send back to the Solani diplomatic office. She had reported on human behavior before. She had described it in precise and measured terms for audiences who had not directly observed it. She was having difficulty finding the precise and measured terms for what she had just seen. The humans had gone into a patrol engagement without numerical advantage, without tactical superiority, without the element of surprise, and with ships that the Karath would classify as light civilian-grade tonnage. They had done this without discussion, without visible anxiety, and without the slightest suggestion that the alternative, turning around, was a thing that existed in their consideration. Not courage, exactly. Leth Kas had catalogued courage in many species. Courage was what you called it when a being overcame fear. These people did not look like they were overcoming anything. They looked like they were doing their jobs. She stayed on the floor for another minute, then stood up, and went to help Bosco in the mess hall, because there was going to be work to do when they reached Kalos Dawn. And she had read enough about Solani biology to be useful with triage. She learned two things in the next hour: that Bosco was a faster learner than anyone had told her, and that in the Solani medical tradition, you did not work on a patient without the appropriate tools and training. Bosco's approach to this principle was to watch more videos. On the Karath patrol ship retreating toward the deeper corridor, the patrol commander sat at his communications console and completed his report. He described the engagement accurately. He described the ship types, the armaments, the crew counts as best he could estimate them. Then he described the behavior. He spent a long time on the behavior. He used the Karath military code for irrational, applied to movement patterns. He used the word that meant did not respond to standard deterrence. He used a phrase that translated loosely as continued moving when cessation was the logical conclusion. His superior, receiving the report 3 hours later, read it twice. Then he sent a query deeper into the corridor, to the fleet that was waiting near the coordinates of Kalos Dawn. The message said, human ships incoming, they know. They are still coming. The fleet commander read this. He read it again. He did not fully understand it, not in the sense of finding it impossible, because clearly it was happening, but in the sense of the shape of it, the why of it, which did not align with anything in his understanding of how species behaved when faced with superior force in hostile space. He filed the query away and ordered his fleet to hold position. He would understand it, or he would not. The humans were still coming regardless. On the 11th day, Yala stopped counting hours. She had been counting them since the second day, when it became clear that rescue was a hypothetical, and the most useful thing she could do with her mind was give it something small and manageable to hold on to. Hours. She had counted 546 of them before she stopped, not because she'd lost track, but because the number had started to mean something she didn't want it to mean. She was a Solani research scientist, 40 years old, with a specialty in exogeological formation patterns. She had come aboard Kalos Dawn to study a rock formation at the edge of the null corridor that her models suggested was 3 billion years old. She had found it, catalogued it, sent her preliminary data to her home institution, and then the ship had been hit. Not by weapons, by something that she had since come to understand was a Karath interference pulse, a specialized device they used to collapse FTL drives in a targeted vessel without destroying the ship itself. Destroying the ship would be wasteful. A disabled ship that sat in the corridor, broadcasting, was better. It attracted others. Yala had worked this out on day 4. She had not shared it with the rest of the crew immediately. She'd needed to be certain. She'd been certain since day 6. She was sitting in the corner of the engineering bay when she heard footsteps and looked up to find Dreth approaching. He was a Tharic structural engineer, wide, low-gravity built, with the particular density of his species and a face that expressed things in ways she had spent 11 days learning to read. Right now, his face said, "The news I have is the same as the news I had before," which was not good. "Life support," she asked. 34%. He sat down next to her. His weight against the floor was audible. "I've isolated sections B through D. Everyone's moved to A&E. We can hold maybe." He stopped. "How long, Dreth?" 60 hours. "Maybe 70 if we restrict movement." 70 hours. She ran the math without meaning to, the way she always ran math, automatically. The way breathing is automatic. At best, a rescue ship from the nearest coalition position was 4 days away. 96 hours, against 70. She had run this math on day 2, on day 5, and again this morning, hoping the variables had changed. They had not changed. She looked at the ceiling. The Kalos Dawn was dark except for the amber emergency lighting, which gave everything the color of old wood, and made the faces around her look like old photographs. "How many people are asleep right now?" she asked. "Half, maybe more." He was quiet for a moment. "It conserves oxygen." She nodded. 212 of the 312 crew were functional. 60 had minor injuries. 40 had serious injuries that were being managed by the 2 doctors on board. Several were critical. Several were no longer. She did not finish the thought. "The signal?" she asked. "Still transmitting." "It'll transmit until the power fails." He paused. No response. No response. 11 days and no response. The Galactic Coalition, the greatest collective of species in the known galaxy. The body that had 1,700 warships and 4,000 diplomatic personnel, and a standing emergency rescue treaty that every member species had signed, had sent no response. Yala understood why. She had the same information they had. The math was the same math. She held no bitterness about it, which was one of the things she liked least about herself. She was very good at understanding reasons, and reasons did not keep people alive. Dreth shifted. "I want to move the critical patients to Section A. The air quality is better there." "Do it." He stood. He stood in the way that large tired things stand, carefully, in stages, saving the energy. He looked at her for a moment, and in the amber light, his face said something she recognized. The look of a person who has made peace with a thing and is now waiting for the thing to arrive. She had seen that look in the mirror 2 days ago. She had not looked in the mirror since. Dreth was halfway to the door when the signal console beeped. Not the distress loop, the receive channel. They both stopped. The beep came again. Yala crossed the room in 4 steps, which was fast for her, and pulled up the console. The signal was narrow beam, encrypted with a code block she didn't recognize. She put it through the translation matrix and read it twice before she said anything. "Dreth." He came back. She stepped aside, let him read it. He read it. Then he read it again. Then he said quietly, in his own language, an expression that Yala's translator rendered as, "The ground is moving." The message was short. "Kalos Dawn, this is Lieutenant Commander Voss, ESV Relentless Earth Coalition Fleet. We have your position. We are approximately 9 hours out. We have 2 additional vessels. We will reach you. Please confirm status and prepare for emergency docking. Do not alter your current position. Do not attempt to move. Hold on." Yala read it a 3rd time. She had spent 11 days building a version of reality in which no message came. She had constructed that reality carefully and lived in it thoroughly, because the alternative, the version where something came, was a weight she could not carry without somewhere to put it down. Now she had somewhere to put it down. The wall she had built to keep herself functional held for about 4 seconds. Then it didn't. She sat down hard on the console chair and pressed both her hands over her face and breathed in the way you breathe when something has broken in you that you didn't know was being held together. Dreth stood next to her. He did not speak. He put one large hand on her shoulder and kept it there, which was everything. After 2 minutes, she took her hands away from her face. "Humans," she said. It was not a question. It was not even really surprise. It was something else. A sound you make when the universe does something that doesn't fit in any category you had prepared for it. "How many ships do humans have in this sector?" Dreth asked. 3. She looked at him. "They have 3 ships." Dreth absorbed this. He looked at the message again. Then he looked at the star chart on the wall, where the gray of the null corridor surrounded them on all sides, and the Kareth patrol zones moved like shadows. "They came through the corridor on sublight," he said. "That's the only way through." Another silence. "Past the Kareth patrols, yes." Dreth made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the Theric equivalent, as close as Yala could tell, of standing in front of something large and having no language for it yet. "I need to tell the crew," she said. "Yes." She stood. Her legs were steadier than she expected. She picked up the shipwide comm and pressed the channel. Her voice, she noticed, was also steadier than she expected. "Attention all. Kalos, Dawn. Crew, this is Dr. Yala. We have received a response to our distress signal." She stopped for one breath. "The Earth Coalition fleet has located us. They are 9 hours out, 3 vessels. They are coming." Silence across the shipwide channel. Then from somewhere deep in the vessel, Section E, she thought near the crew quarters, a sound started. Not a word, a sound. The kind that comes out of people when something that was wound very tight is allowed, finally, to release. Others joined it. It was not a cheer. Exactly. It was rougher than a cheer. It was the sound of 200 people who had spent 11 days not making that sound. In the corridor outside, the Kareth fleet was aware. It had been aware since the patrol report. The fleet commander had repositioned his 12 vessels in a configuration that served 2 purposes. It blocked the most direct approach to Kalos Dawn, and it gave him excellent lines of fire on any approaching ship. He had also been told, through informal intelligence channels, that the ships approaching were 3 light frigates from the human fleet. He had their specifications in his tactical database. He had read them. He had read them with the kind of attention you pay to information that is factually accurate and simultaneously absurd. 3 ships, light armament, old class, against 12 warships and a disabled vessel he had been using as bait for 3 weeks. He understood the situation mathematically. He had understood it since the patrol's first contact report. What he did not understand, what was sitting in the back of his tactical mind like a stone in a boot, was the behavior. His patrol had fired on them. His patrol had damaged 1 vessel, and they had kept coming. In his experience, when something was hurt and outmatched and rational, it stopped. These things were not stopping. He did not yet have a word for what they were doing. He pulled it over in his mind and found no category for it. On the relentless, Voss received Kalos Dawn. His confirmation signal 9 minutes after she sent hers. The confirmation included a detailed crew status report. Yala had put it together in 20 minutes, which was faster than Voss had expected, and told her something useful about the scientist, and a layout of the ship's current structural state. She read it once. She passed it to Meridian. She called. Cold patience. On the narrow band. Cold patience. Responded instantly. This was unusual. Cold patience had been silent for most of the last 18 hours, running dark and collecting intelligence. The fact that they responded instantly meant they had been waiting. Report, said Voss, the commander of Cold Patience. A woman named Asa Kier, whose speaking style could be described as minimalist on its verbose days, said, 12 Kareth vessels holding position around target. They're in an intercept configuration. A pause. It's a trap. Was always a trap, said Voss. The disabled vessel was bait. Yes, we're walking into it anyway. We're continuing our course, said Voss, which was the same thing said differently. Another pause from Kier, then I have their comm frequencies. Voss went still. All of them? All 12. 16 hours of passive collection. I know their patrol cycling, their check-in intervals, their command chain. A shorter pause. If you want to be very loud, very publicly, I can put you on their command frequency. Voss looked at the tactical display. 12 Kareth ships. 3 human ships. 9 hours to Kalos Dawn. She thought about it for 4 seconds. Do it, she said. I want to transmit in Karath. I want every one of their ships to hear it, and I want it on frequencies that their command will also receive. Simultaneously. What do you want to say? Voss picked up a pen. She still used a physical pen, which Hale had once described as extremely her, and wrote 6 lines on a notepad. She held it up to the camera. Kerr read it. There was a sign. That's a bluff, said Kerr, partially. The part about backup ships is a bluff. The ship ID numbers are real. They exist. They're not coming. Voss set the pen down, but the Kareth don't know which part is the bluff. A shorter silence. Understood, said Kerr. 40 minutes later, on all active Karath frequencies in the null corridor, a signal went out. It was in Karath military communication standard, without encryption, broadcast wide. It said, to all Karath vessels in grid sectors 7 through 14, this is Lieutenant Commander Voss, Earth Coalition Fleet. We are aware of your positions. Your fleet configuration, ship IDs, and patrol schedules are logged and transmitted to Coalition space. We have listed your vessels by registration number. Then it listed them, all 12, by number. Additional Coalition vessels are en route. We will reach the Kalos Dawn. We will remove all 312 crew. You may engage us if you choose. We will be providing regular status updates to Coalition space and the galactic press for the duration of our operation. Thank you for your attention. On the Kareth Fleet Command ship, the commander read the transmission. His communications officer waited. The fleet held position. 3 seconds passed. 5, 10. Hold, said the commander. He did not know if the backup ships were real. He did not know how they had gotten his ship IDs. He did not know what kind of species sent a message like this with 3 ships against 12. He held, because the message had done something that no weapon yet had managed. It had introduced doubt, and the humans were still coming. The cold patience hit. Kalos Dawn. Hard. There was no gentle way to dock without a functioning airlock alignment system, and Kalos Dawn. His alignment system had gone offline on day 4. Asa brought her ship in at an angle that her navigator spent 40 seconds arguing was wrong, and that Kerr spent 0 seconds reconsidering, and the 2 vessels met with a noise that resonated through both hulls like a struck bell. Then the cutting started. Cold Patience had an emergency breach kit in her maintenance hold that was technically for asteroid mining operations and had never been used for anything. The 2 engineers who pulled it out had to read the manual, which was 8 pages long, while standing in their suits in the connecting corridor. One of them read it aloud. The other listened and worked. They cut through in 14 minutes. Dreth, on the other side of the hull, heard the cutter before he saw the light come through. He had assembled the critical condition patients near the cut site, 22 of them, on stretchers improvised from storage panels and suit material, and he stood back as the hull opened and a young human face appeared in the gap, wearing a suit and holding a plasma cutter, and looking exactly like someone who had just done something they were not supposed to be able to do, and was moving on to the next thing. "You Dreth," said the human. "Yes," said Dreth. "Good, I'm Tiv." The human climbed through the gap and immediately started looking around at the engineering bay with the rapid visual assessment of someone taking inventory. "Voss says you know this ship's engine room. I need a co-pilot, eh?" Dreth looked at him. "I'm a structural engineer." "Right." She said that too. "Do you know which end of the ship moves?" "Yes." "Good enough. These are your critical cases." He pointed at the stretchers. "Yes. We're moving them first. Can you walk me through the engine room layout while we do that?" He was already lifting the first stretcher, with the ease of someone who had lifted many heavy things and would lift many more today. "I can multitask." Dreth found himself lifting the other end of the stretcher. He did not entirely know how that had happened. On the Relentless, now hard docked against Kalos Dawn. Port access on the other side. Bosco had stopped watching videos. There was no more time for videos. There was only time for the thing itself. He had his station in the Relentless mess hall, which he had reorganized with the help of 3 volunteers into something that was not a medical bay, but was doing the work of one. He had clean surfaces. He had the supplies from storage. He had the 2 volunteers reading instructions aloud from the same tablet he had been studying for the last 2 days, and he had a line of patients coming through the docking connection that was growing faster than he could process them. He had also, somewhere in the last 2 hours, stopped thinking of himself as a cook. Not consciously, not as a decision he made, just. At some point, his hands stopped being cook's hands and started being whatever these hands needed to be, and the thinking and the doing merged into a single continuous movement that left no room for the category error. The first patient was a Vreth with a compound fracture of the upper limb and 3 days of immobilization done incorrectly. Bosco looked at it, looked at his notes, and did what he could. The second patient was a Solani with respiratory distress from the bad air. That was easier. The third patient was a human, one of the research team, a woman in her 30s who had a head injury that Bosco wasn't equipped to assess fully, and he looked at her and said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him through half-closed eyes. "I'm not a doctor," he said. "I'm the cook." She blinked. "I'm going to keep you stable until we get you to someone better, okay?" She moved her mouth. It might have been. Okay. It might have been her name, he wasn't sure. "Good," he said and got to work. Behind him at the door to the mess hall, one of his volunteers, a 19-year-old named Ren, who had signed on to this mission as a communications specialist and was now handing Bosco instruments and not crying, said quietly, "She's going to get us killed." It took Bosco a second to understand who she was. "Voss?" He didn't look up. "She said everyone. She won't leave until everyone's aboard." Ren's voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of someone stating a thing they needed to say out loud. "There are still 40 people on that ship and the Kareth fleet is." "Load the next group," said Bosco. Ren stopped. "I know," said Bosco. He still didn't look up. His hands were busy. "Load the next group." Ren loaded the next group. Outside, the Kareth moved, not all of them, not the full fleet. The fleet was still sitting at their holding position, still uncertain, still running the math on the bluff and finding no clean answer. But a single Kareth vessel broke from the formation and accelerated on a flanking vector, and the Relentless sensor operator Don called it the moment it moved. Single contact, flanking, 8 minutes to weapons range. Voss heard it from the docking corridor, where she was personally helping move a stretcher. She set the stretcher down, handed it to the person behind her, and walked to the nearest comm panel. "Meridian. Take the flanker." Rose's voice came back immediately. "On it." Meridian was already undocking from her own connection point. She had finished her section's evacuation, 206 people transferred, and she came around Kalos Dawn's hull like she had been waiting for the order. She had been waiting for the order. The Kareth flanker saw the Meridian coming and adjusted. They traded fire at medium range, 3 exchanges, back and forth, neither giving ground. Meridian took a hit to her midsection that knocked out 2 compartments and injured 6 crew. She kept firing. The flanker, facing a damaged ship that was not retreating, and was in fact accelerating toward it, did something that its commanders would later struggle to explain in their debrief. It pulled back. Not because it was losing, not because it was damaged, because the math had stopped being the kind of math it understood. Kalos dawn. The evacuation was 30 minutes from complete. Dreth was in the engine room with Tiv, and he had in the last hour learned things about piloting that he had never expected to know. Not because Tiv had taught him in any formal sense, but because Tiv talked constantly while he worked, narrating his actions, explaining his reasoning, asking questions in a way that was less about getting answers and more about thinking aloud. And Dreth found, to his own surprise, that he was absorbing it, filling the mental categories of structural integrity and load distribution, with new content labeled thrust vectoring and compensatory burn. If we need to move this ship, Tiv said, it's going to be rough. The drive is shot, but the maneuvering thrusters are still technically on. They're just depressurized on the port side line, said Dreth. Tiv looked at him. I did the structural assessment on day 3, said Dreth. I needed to know what was failing and in what order. Can you repressurize it? Not fully. Enough? Enough, said Tiv, who had the engineer's talent for transforming technically adequate into a plan. It took them 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, Dreth was aware that he had stopped functioning as a passenger on this rescue and had become, in some quiet way he didn't fully have words for, a part of it. He was carrying one end of this thing. The weight of it was distributed between him and the small, relentlessly practical human across the engineering console from him, and the weight was therefore bearable. He was not sure what to do with that realization. He filed it on the relentless. The count reached 280, 290, 300. Voss was in the docking corridor. She was counting herself, cross-referencing against the manifest she had memorized. She knew these names, all 312. She had read the manifest 4 times on the approach through the corridor. 305. 12 still aboard, said the frame. Kalos dawn. Crew liaison through the comm. Where? Forward compartments, Section F. It's sealed. The door mechanism failed. Section F. She had the ship layout in her head. Section F was 4 corridors forward. Meridian was trading fire with the Kareth flanker. The rest of the fleet was moving, slowly but moving, closing the distance. Voss looked at the manifest. She looked at the corridor forward. She looked at Hale standing behind her. I need a cutter and 2 people who know structural systems, she said. Hale opened his mouth. Don't. He closed his mouth. Then he handed her the cutter from the emergency kit on the wall, because it had been there since the docking and they both knew she had been aware of it the whole time. She went forward. The 4 corridors were dark, emergency amber, long shadows. She moved through them with the cutter in one hand and the manifest in the other, and somewhere behind her she heard the 2 volunteers Hale had found following at the distance. That sensible people follow someone who is going somewhere that isn't safe. Section F's door was jammed at 40% open, not fully sealed, 40%. The 12 crew inside had not been able to widen it. Voss looked at it for 2 seconds. She put the cutter to the frame and cut. It took 5 minutes. It felt longer. When the door gave, the 12 crew on the other side looked at her with the expressions of people who have been sitting in the dark for 3 days longer than hope should have lasted. There was a Vreth elder, 3 Thorak researchers, 6 Solani junior staff, 2 humans she didn't know. She looked at the manifest. She counted. 12. Let's go, she said. They went. In the Kareth Fleet command ship, the commander watched his tactical display update in real time. The human rescue ships were still docked. The evacuation was still ongoing. His flanker had pulled back for reasons that were hard to explain without sounding like the explanation didn't belong in a military report. The fleet was 4 minutes from weapons range on the docked vessels. His communications officer turned from her console. Commander, the humans are transmitting again. Broadband. What are they saying? She read it. They're broadcasting the evacuation status. In real time. They're telling the galactic press. They've flagged it as a live press broadcast. The number of crew evacuated. The names of the Kareth vessels in range. The current tactical situation. A pause. They're calling it a rescue operation under fire. They are naming your ship, Commander. He was quiet. 307. 308. He watched the number go up in real time on the intercepted broadcast. If he fired now, if he destroyed the docked vessels now, the names of his fleet were attached to that number. In every press relay in known coalition space he held 312. On the relentless. Voss walked back through the docking corridor with 12 people behind her, and at the door of the mess hall she found Bosco, who looked up from what he was doing, and looked at her and looked past her at the 12, and his face did something complicated. That's everyone? He said. That's everyone, she said. Bosco sat down on the floor of the mess hall right where he was standing and put his face in his hands for about 5 seconds. Then he stood up and went back to work. Undock, Voss said into her comm. The 3 ships separated from Kalos Dawn, which Tiv and Dreth had managed to coax into a very slow accompanying drift on maneuvering thrusters, and turned for the corridor exit. The Kareth fleet was 2 minutes behind them. The number was still being broadcast. 312, all of them. The Bay Meridian was dying. Not immediately, not all at once. She was dying the way old ships die when they have taken one too many hits in the same afternoon. Slowly by degrees, one system going quiet after another as the damage crept through her from the aft section forward. Her hull was intact. Her crew was alive. Her engines were at 31%. 31% was enough to move, barely. Captain Rowe had run the numbers twice and accepted the result both times. They were 8 hours from the corridor exit. The Meridian could maintain her current speed for approximately 5 of those hours before the engine situation became something different. From struggling and became something called stopped. She called Voss on the command channel. I can make it, she said. Tell me what make it means in your current math, said Voss. Rowe told her. Silence. We're not leaving you, said Voss. I know. I'm saying the relentless should push ahead with the survivors. Cold patience can pace me. Will. We're not separating. Full stop. Voss was quiet for half a second. What do you need? About 3 hours of engine work and a miracle. I can get you engineers, said Voss. Dreth, the thorax structural engineer from Kalos Dawn. I have my own engineers. You have tired engineers. He has been sitting in the dark on a failing ship for 11 days thinking about what keeps things structurally intact. He has been waiting for something to fix. Voss paused. He's also been talking to Tiv for 2 hours. Between the two of them, I'd like to see what they can do with 31%. Another silence from Rowe. Send them, she said. The transfer was done by suit. A short burn between ships, Dreth and Tiv, crossing the gap in the dark with nothing but their suits and the tether line between them. Dreth had done spacewalks before in his professional capacity, inspecting hull integrity on large structures. He had never done one while a Kareth fleet was positioned somewhere behind him at an unknown and closing distance. He did not enjoy it. He enjoyed the engine room of the Meridian considerably more because the Meridian's engine room was a problem, and problems were things he was good at. He and Tiv worked in near silence, which was not how they had worked on Kalos Dawn. Their Tiv had narrated constantly, but in this space, at this pace, with this particular kind of pressure, they fell into a rhythm that didn't need words. Tiv pointed, Dreth assessed, one of them acted, the other compensated. Meridian. His chief engineer, a human woman named Paz who had been awake for 22 hours, watched them for 40 minutes and then stopped watching and started handing tools, because there was no point in watching when there was work to be done. Behind them, the Kareth fleet was still following. Not gaining, but not falling back, holding distance, like someone following at a pace designed to watch rather than catch. Cold patience ran between the Meridian and the fleet, keeping her sensor suite live, broadcasting continuously. Asa Kerr had been broadcasting since the evacuation, not just status updates now, but full telemetry, ship positions, fleet movements, time-stamped and transmitted to every coalition press relay in range. This was, technically, not a military tactic. It was also working. The Kareth fleet commander was watching his own broadcast in real time. His name was in it. His fleet's movements were in it. Every decision he made was being documented by a small censorship he couldn't suppress without destroying it openly, in front of the entire press relay network, which would transform a quiet corridor operation into an interstellar incident with his name attached. He held distance. He watched. He did not fire. At hour 4, the Meridian. His engines came up to 47%. Not a miracle. 47% was not miraculous. It was the result of 2 structural engineers and a chief engineer making a series of decisions that, taken individually, each represented a controlled risk and, taken together, represented the kind of desperate competence that doesn't have a more precise name. Rowe felt the change in the engine tone from the command bridge and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then she opened them, because there was still 4 hours of corridor to cross. On the relentless. Lethkos was in the converted medical bay, which was what the mess hall was now. She had been working alongside Bosco for the last 9 hours. She had stopped being a diplomatic observer approximately 4 hours ago, in any practical sense. Right now she was holding the arm of a Thurrock researcher named Vel, while Bosco worked on the wound that had been improperly dressed for 11 days. Vel was talking. He talked a lot when he was in pain, a Thurrock response that Lethkos found easier to accommodate now that she'd had 9 hours of practice. He was talking about his family, his children, the research project he had been working on before the incident. He talked in the rapid, looping way of someone keeping their mind very busy. Bosco worked and listened. He did not tell Vel to be quiet. He did not tell Vel everything would be fine. He listened and occasionally said, "I hear you," and worked, and that was the whole of it. Later, much later after all of this, Lethkos would write her report. She would spend considerable time on this moment, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't, because a man whose official designation was ship's cook sat in a converted mess hall at the end of a 19-hour emergency procedure and listened to a patient talk about his children, and that was the thing she most needed to convey. It was the ordinary enormity of it. The corridor exit came up at hour 7 and 40 minutes. The relentless crossed first back into normal space, FTL capabilities re-engaging with a hum that felt to everyone who heard it like a door unlocking. Then cold patience. Then they Meridian. Trailing, engines at 49% and climbing, her hull carrying the visible geometry of damage that would take 3 months in dry dock to fix properly. The Kareth fleet stopped at the corridor boundary. They did not cross. They stayed in the gray and watched the 3 human ships come out into known space and did not follow. The reasons for this were debated in Kareth military circles for some time afterward. Some argued it was strategic calculation, coalition space, open engagement, the press coverage. Some argued it was the unknown factor of cold patience. Sensor data now transmitted broadly enough that destruction of the ship would not destroy the evidence. Some argued it was the backup ships that may or may not have existed. No one, in any of those discussions, used the simple word, afraid. But the Kareth commander, watching the 3 ships come out of the corridor and turn toward coalition space, felt something he had no military category for, something that sat in his chest and did not resolve. He filed his report. He described the operation accurately. He described the bluff. He described the behavior. He described the result. He used the phrase his patrol commander had used. Contagious madness. In his private log, which was not a military document and was never transmitted anywhere, he wrote a different phrase. It translated roughly as, "They do not have an ending they accept." Veth Station received the 3 ships 11 hours after they crossed back into known space. The docking bay was not quiet. The council had been in session, the sort of emergency session that gets called when something happens that the standard meeting agenda doesn't have a category for, and a significant portion of that session had ended when the first confirmation signal from the relentless came through. Some of the delegates had moved to the observation deck. Others had remained at their seats, which was not because they lacked interest, but because some things are easier to absorb when you are seated. The 312 crew of Kalos Dawn came off the ships over the course of 2 hours. Some walked, some were on stretchers, several were carried. The Solani medical teams from the station took charge in an efficient rush of organized care, and Bosco stood at the end of the docking ramp and watched them go with the face of someone who has been running on something that is not sleep or food for too long and is only now noticing. A Solani medic approached him. "Are you injured?" she asked. Bosco thought about it. "I'm a cook," he said. She looked at the state of his hands, his clothes, the dried evidence of 9 hours of field triage on his arms. "Do you need medical attention?" she asked again. "I need a chair," he said. She gave him one. Dreth came off the Meridian with Tiv at his side, and the 2 of them stood together on the docking bay floor for a moment, with the particular quality of people who have shared a tight space and hard work for too many hours and are now adjusting to the fact that the space has opened up. "You're a good engineer," Tiv said. "I'm a structural engineer," said Dreth. You're a good engineer," said Tiv again, with the finality of someone who was not interested in the distinction. Dreth was quiet. "Then, you came through the corridor, in those ships." "Yes." "Why?" Tiv looked at him with the mild expression of someone being asked to explain a thing that doesn't feel like it has an explanation because it is simply the shape of reality. "There were 312 people on that ship." Dreth waited. "That's why," said Tiv. In the council chamber, Admiral Keth of the Solani stood at the head of the table and looked at the arrival report. Then he walked to the docking bay observation window and looked at the ships. The Relentless had a hull patch on her port side that was a different color from the rest of the hull, which meant it was newer. The Meridian had visible scoring along her aft section and one nacelle that was not sitting at the correct angle. Cold patience. Looked intact but had run her systems hard enough that her heat signature was still elevated, which showed on the station's sensors as a warm orange glow. He had known these ships were coming. He had received their status reports throughout the operation, via cold patience. His transmissions. He had been in the chamber when the number reached 312. He had not expected to feel what he was feeling now, which was something he had no precise name for in the Solani emotional taxonomy. He was still standing at the window when he heard Voss enter the chamber behind him. He turned. She looked exactly like someone who had been awake for 30-plus hours, which was not a military or diplomatic comment, but simply true. Her uniform was in better shape than Bosco's. Her face was the same flat, contained thing it had always been, except that underneath the containment something was happening that had not been visible before. Tiredness, probably. The release of something that had been held in place by will for a long time. Keth looked at her. We calculated a 0.3% survival probability, he said, for the Kalos Dawn crew. A pause. We ran the numbers 3 separate times, he added, with different variables. The highest estimate was 0.3%. Voss looked at him. We don't really use that number, she said. He did not respond immediately. He turned back to the window. Outside, the 3 ships sat in their docking clamps, and the station's repair crews were already moving around them, with the assessment tools of people, beginning to understand how much work there was to do. No, said Keth finally. Not agreement exactly. Understanding. The kind that arrives after the fact and sits differently than knowledge. I see that you don't. In the Solani Council records, filed within the hour, Yala's report on the rescue operation ran to 47 pages. She was a thorough scientist. She documented everything. The signal, the waiting, the count of hours, the message from the relentless. The evacuation, the behavior of the humans throughout. Her conclusion was 3 sentences. The humans came. They had no tactical advantage, no numerical superiority, and no strategic necessity to act. They came because there were people there. In the Karath command logs, flagged confidential and internal, the Corridor Fleet Commander officially noted that 3 contested patrol sectors along the corridor boundary would be deprioritized for the coming cycle. No announcement, no treaty, no acknowledgement. They just moved back. No one in the coalition officially claimed to understand why. In the docking bay, Bosco sat in his chair and ate something that someone had brought him. He wasn't entirely sure what it was, but it was warm, and there was a lot of it, which were the 2 qualities he required most, and watched the station's medical teams work. He watched the Solani doctors assess the patients he had managed for 9 hours, and he watched them make the small faces that doctors make when they look at field work done without the right tools and training, the faces that lived somewhere between, "This isn't how we do it," and it worked. He was fine with that. In the quiet, after the immediate rush had passed, and the corridor outside the docking bay had settled into the lower hum of ongoing care rather than emergency, Leth Koss found him there. She sat in the chair next to him without being invited, which felt appropriate. They sat together for a while. You know I'm writing a report, she said. About the mission? About humans. She was quiet for a moment. I've written 3 before, about your species, academic studies, behavioral analysis. A pause. I think I'm going to have to revise my methodology. Why? She thought about it. Because I've been studying you from the outside, she said, and that turns out to miss a great deal. Bosco ate another bite of the warm thing. There's going to be another signal, he said. Not a prediction, a statement of fact. The way you state the thing you know is coming because it has always come before. Some other ship. Some other corridor. Leth Koss said nothing. She's already reading coordinates, said Bosco, meaning Voss, meaning. Somewhere on this station right now there was a woman looking at a star map, with the same contained expression she had worn, walking out of the council chamber. Except now the star map was different and the expression meant the same thing it had always meant. Leth Koss looked at him for a moment. Will you go? She asked. Bosco finished the warm thing, set the container down, looked at his hands, at what was on them and what they had done today and what they were capable of, apparently, when the situation required it. Yeah, he said. There was nothing complicated in the word. No drama, no resolution. Just the simple shape of a decision that had never actually been in question. The galaxy had many words for courage. It had long and formal words, ancient words carried forward from the old martial traditions of a dozen species. Words that meant the overcoming of fear. Words that meant sacrifice. Words that meant valor. Humanity just had the one. Again. And somewhere in the dark, another signal was already coming.